All right. Well, it's 2 o'clock. We got a nice schedule. I just mostly the first 10 minutes will be just sort of housekeeping stuff, and then at 2:10, Craig Coker will speak. My name is Richard Anthony. I'm the vice president in charge of advocacy for Zero Waste USA. The COOLNow program is one of our campaigns, and the second one is the Save the Albatross Coalition. But we're talking about COOLNow. And I think it's a very important campaign given where we are. In terms of questions, if you have questions, put them in the chat and stay muted until acknowledged. Chris will monitor the chat, and if it's has to come, question goes in, he'll interrupt and do it. Most of the time, we'll wait to the end of the speaker. Raise hand to get in line for verbal questions. Everybody knows if you go to the participant box, there's a hand raise thing, reaction. That's a reaction box, I'm sorry. The hand raise will get our attention, get Chris's attention, probably not mine. At the end of this, we're going to talk about an EPA opinion letter for funding. We want you to look at that. It's all about compost and food waste reduction facilities. The link is in the chat. And then finally, stick around for about a minute for the Zoom poll at the end of the webinar to see how well we did. So that's the housekeeping. There's another slide, right? All right. So this is today. We've been talking, let me just say how this sort of came about is that in California, both Schwarzenegger and Brown were, as governors, were concerned about air pollution and global warming, and Schwarzenegger basically had every city in California write a zero waste plan, and then Jerry Brown had the air board fly over all the landfills in California to measure what the pollutants are. He did that in '79 with groundwater, and we came up with some groundwater treatment that we had to do for online landfills. But when they flew over, they realized that the methane coming out of the landfills was a huge component what was coming into into the atmosphere. Peter Anderson says some of the science say it's 20 to 30% of the methane out there. This is all human-made methane that we can deal with, though. Well, and the UN in Scotland, when they came together again this year, went through all the gyrations that they go through when they do that stuff. And then they started talking about the landfills, and that they were methane generators, and they were consistently across the planet, and really called for the world to change the way they were managing organics. Essentially, get them away from decomposition in landfill, get them into a controlled composting program. I think this is perfect for what we need to do as far as our campaigning in California, United States, the world. In fact, let me say this, that in Europe, actually, organics have been phased out of landfills, and they have deadlines to do that. And that's called across Europe. So we wouldn't be the first ones to do this. So what we're asking is to get community organizers who are working in their cities, trying to make the quality of life better and the environment better and the air cleaner for their children, to organize so that they can get their city to change the direction. What we know is that in the planning of getting what we know is the federal government has put out billions of dollars for infrastructure, and the money is flowing to different agencies, and the environment, infrastructure, this all fits in just perfectly. And so the key is to help you, one, your plan and your stakeholders are 90% of the effort. Once you get that together, you need to then focus on the policymakers and the grant funders. And with that, you'll move forward. So today we're going to talk about government, basically what you need in terms of equipment and siting for your facility. Craig Coker is here. He's an expert in this field. He's been around a while, and he's done a lot of programs. And then we're going to talk about procurement and marketing. Anthony Mint's here to talk about even the idea of land spreading it as a way to make sure that there won't be any surplus. In my mind, and I've said this a couple times, and nobody's jumped on and said I'm wrong yet, but I'll say it to Matt Cotton maybe, is that I don't know of any composting programs in California that are not finding a place to put their finished material. And maybe Anthony can talk a little bit about that as he talks about procurement products for all infrastructure and products in government lands. So the attention here would be to give you the information to put your plan together, help direct you in terms of what you need and how you're going to market it, and then putting the direction on the funding out there to help get this accomplished. And I think a campaign across the United States that talks about getting the methane out of the landfills and making healthy soils for good food is a win-win deal. It's something we have to do one way or another. So that's my story, and that's why I'll stick with that. I think I'm a little early on my time, but I know Craig is ready. So I want to put Craig Coker on now, who's going to talk about what you need and where you're going to put it. Craig?
Thank you, Rick. Let me try to share my screen. I assume you can see my screen, correct?
That's nice and clear. Thank you so much.
Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about compost site selection. I'd like to acknowledge that much of this is taken from the U.S. Composting Council's compost operator training course. So if you've been through that course, if you're a certified compost operations manager, much of this will be familiar to you. Without a doubt, in the 45 years I've worked in the composting industry, finding a good site has been the most challenging aspect of anything I've ever done, either for my own facilities or for the facilities that I've helped others build. So as is anything true, and as is always true in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. And in the composting industry, we have a paradox. We have to be close to our materials and our markets, ideally within 50 to 75 miles, but we need to be far from everything else because neighbors can be an issue with composting facilities. So we end up in our siting processes, ending up with a compromise of making the best of what's available. So let's look at some of the issues that affect composting facility siting. So we have size, environmental issues, access, buffers, zoning and regulations, and most importantly, cost. So if you're an entrepreneur thinking about getting into the composting business, congratulations, welcome aboard. As a good friend of mine once said, the best way to become a millionaire in composting is start with $2 million. The first thing you're going to want to do is find a site for your facility. And so a formal siting study is a very good idea. And there are good tools to use like ArcGIS online. That's very helpful in doing these kinds of analyses. Do a lot of research on previous studies for environmental features in the community you're interested in. Perhaps the site you're looking at has been studied for some other environmental use, and there's a lot of good data available from that previous study. Go through and look at a lot of sites, create a short list and rank that short list by various criteria. I have an article coming out in BioCycle next week on siting, which will go into a little bit more detail on how you evaluate sites. Some of the criteria that you're going to want to think about: transportation, your neighborhood impacts, not only noise, but air quality, and of course, environmental impacts, and of course, the site costs, visual impacts, etc. These are some siting criteria from Sonoma County Waste Management Authority. So the first frontier is space. We have to have room to do things on a composting facility site. We need room to compost. We need room for storage of materials and storage of product. Because we're a volumetric materials handling manufacturing facility, we need room for front-end loaders to move around and for trucks to move around. We need room for handling stormwater runoff. We just need more, as much space as you can get. In 45 years, I've never heard a composter say, you know, I really wish I had a smaller site. So that's a key consideration, making sure you have enough room, not only for now, but for the future as well. On the environmental side, we have all kinds of different things to consider: groundwater, surface water, wetlands, floodplains, those types of things. How close are the neighbors, things like that. Most composting facilities do take up quite a bit of space. And so they should have buffer zones, roughly 300 meters or 1,500 feet. 900 feet to any sensitive receptor. And I define a sensitive receptor as to wherever the public gathers, wherever there is a human nose, that's a sensitive receptor. 300 feet or 100 meters to any well or waterway or wetlands, and 50 meters or 150 feet to any property line. These are generally more constraining than the standard state regulations, which are usually 100 feet from a well and 50 feet from a property line. But in my way of thinking, those just aren't far enough, big enough buffers. And you should definitely make sure that on the site that you wish to purchase for your facility, that you either have an existing buffer or a vegetated buffer, or that you can plant a vegetated buffer. Because as we all know, people smell with their eyes. If they can see your facility, the chances are pretty good they're going to think it smells, even if the cause of that odor is something totally unrelated to what you're doing. It's worthwhile taking the time to build what's called a wind rose for the sites or the areas you're thinking about. This will tell you the predominant direction that the wind blows from and to. You construct these using freeware from Lakes Environmental. You can get the data from the National Climatic Center. And what I do is I get 5 years of data, hourly wind observations, both direction and wind speed. And you get that from the National Climatic Center in the form of a spreadsheet. You upload that spreadsheet into the Lakes Environmental software, which is called WR Plot View, and it will spit out this image that you see here. So what you see here is the direction the wind is blowing towards, and the longer of those legs on that diagram means the more often it blows in that direction. So here we're seeing the predominant wind coming out of the north and the north-northeast, blowing to the south and the south-southwest. The different colors tell you different wind speeds. So how do you use this in site design? Well, you orient your site design so that the predominant wind has the least possibility of picking up an odor from the portions of your site that are handling raw waste. So that your waste receipt area, your mixing area, your initial composting area, all are oriented in a way that keeps that wind from picking up those odors and carrying them off site. Roads, roads and utilities are critically important. With roads, we want to be within 5 miles of a 4-lane arterial, if at all possible. You have to figure out if your site can get to the interstate highway without routing those trucks through residential areas, and never make sure your site is large enough so that trucks bringing material to you don't queue up outside of your facility and onto a public street. Those are the kinds of little things that just irritate the bejesus out of people. For utilities, if you're going to go with aerated static pile composting, which is a growing number of facilities are going that route, you will need 3-phase power. And depending on which electric service provider you're with, you can extending three-phase power to your site can be as little as $20 per linear foot. It can be as high as $200 per linear foot, particularly if your electric service provider is a rural cooperative of some sort. That can be a lot of money very quickly and can certainly knock a site down on the preferred site list if it's going to cost you $25,000 to extend three-phase power. You're going to need a method for managing leachate, leachate is a poor term for this. It's actually contact water, which is rainfall that has come into contact with solid waste or with immature compost. And that contact water needs to be managed professionally. Now, many of us reuse that contact water for moisture addition in early piles that haven't yet reached the pathogen kill time temperature relationship. But you still will need things like a leachate management tank or direct connection to a sewer or perhaps a septic field. And if all possible, avoid mixing any kind of contact water with regular stormwater. So zoning and regulations is one of those unfortunate realities of life. Most of these zoning regulations will have setback distances. They're designed to make sure that land uses are compatible. And you'll see in zoning ordinances certain verbiage that is common to all of them. Land uses in zoning ordinances are considered an allowable use by right. In other words, if you own a piece of land and that land is zoned industrial, then you have certain industrial related land uses that are absolutely allowable in that zone. They probably are not allowable in a residential zone. And there's a lot of those non-permissible or forbidden land uses for different zones listed in your local zoning ordinance. The middle ground is the gray area, which says your proposed composting facility could be an allowable use in this zone if you get a conditional use permit. So permit conditions are required. You have to go through a process of getting the planning commission in your jurisdiction to have a public meeting. That's always a fun exercise. And then if they approve your conditional use permit, you have to get another public hearing from your city or county council. And that too is often a fun exercise. And I say that sarcastically. You will see conditions on your permit that may say you cannot be open on a Sunday morning before 12 noon. Trucks cannot take Adams Street or Water Street or Johnson Street. They have to go on these other routes to avoid impact on traffic. It's the local government's way of saying, yeah, we're okay with this idea, but we want to make sure you have some boundary conditions, shall we say. So one of my clients, a small composter in rural Virginia, bought himself some land that's outside the water and sewer envelope, and he told the planning commission, well, yeah, I'm going to have people coming over to buy my compost. So the planning commission said, well, you're going to have sanitary accommodations for those site visitors. And he said, well, okay, I can do that. And then the planning commission said, and those sanitary those facilities have to be ADA compliant. So lo and behold, he ended up building a ADA compliant outhouse on his 47 acres. You also need to plan for the future. All communities grow in one or more directions, often linked by highways, waterways, rail lines, what have you. But study how your communities have grown over time and make sure you understand that. Because if you don't, you might find yourself buying a piece of land that 10, 15, 20 years from now is not going to be the best site in the world. This is a site near Charlotte, North Carolina, where the composting facility's owner's father, many years ago, sold off portions of rural land to subdivisions, which popped up like weeds in a field. And so his neighbors can sit out on their decks and drink their morning coffee and watch him turn his windrows. And because people smell with their eyes, there have been a slew of odor complaints that were not his fault, but still. So that's one of the reasons why you've got to clearly understand the patterns of growth. This is an aerial photograph of a portion of Montgomery County, Maryland, that lies between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland, where we sited the first project I ever worked on was a biosolids composting project. And as you can see in the aerial, we found the site was relatively rural. There wasn't a whole lot of neighbors around. Lo and behold, 38 years later, that same site is now very surrounded by neighbors, and the underlying value of the land became so great that the Sanitary Commission, which is WSSC is short for Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, ultimately said, well, we're not going to do composting here. We're going to sell this land and make some money on it. Then we get to the issue of cost, which is the biggest headache in siting is buying land. Now, agricultural land, the average price of farmland in the US last year was $3,380 per acre. If that land had been used for crops, it was selling for $4,420 per acre. And if it was just being used for pasture, it was sold for $1,480 per acre. So using the median or the farm-based value of roughly $3,400 an acre, which has gone up 68% in the last 15 years. And there's huge amount of variation from state to state, as you can imagine. But it's hard to envision any kind of full-scale, commercial, independent, merchant-style composting facility locating on less than 20 acres. So if you're going to pay $3,400 an acre for 20 acres, you're going to be spending some serious money on land. So that's just something else to keep in mind and consider and make sure you have adequate budget for. Industrial land could be even higher. I'm helping a client try to find a site right now for a second facility. We're getting prices this is a rural county in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia with a college town as the county seat and an interstate highway bisecting the county north to south. We're getting prices of like $35,000 to $50,000 an acre. One fellow we talked with said, yeah, I'll sell you my farm for $125,000 an acre. And we said, well, thank you. Have a nice day. You get to some places like islands that have limited supply, like Martha's Vineyard. 2 years ago, I did a project up there and land prices then were almost $75,000 an acre. These kinds of land prices drive decisions about composting approaches. So, for example, aerated static pile, which is one method of composting, versus turned windrows, which is a different method of composting. Turned windrows require a lot more land area than aerated static pile. So if your site has constraints, then you may have to go to a technology with a higher, what I call processing density. And I define processing density as tons per day processed per square foot of composting pad. So with aerated static pile, you have a greater processing density. So you can either take in more material on a fixed footprint, or you can take in the same amount of material on a smaller footprint. Those are some of the issues to think about when you're thinking about looking for a site for a composting facility. And with that, I guess we'll do questions at the end. My contact information is shown here. I'm happy to have a conversation with any of you about questions you might have about siting or composting or pretty much anything at all. Rick, back to you.
Thanks, Craig. That was a great presentation. Absolutely. Next up, Anthony Mint, who's going to talk about procurement and land spreading and a lot of other things. Anthony, it's all yours.
Well, thanks everybody. Just getting the screen share started. And I mostly want to begin with one main message, which is to say that a lot of energy and discussion and policy is going to focus on organic matter diversion, and that's great. And of course, a huge critical first step, getting the organics out of landfill. And I think our work is primarily focused on what happens next, and that kind of healthy soil building and carbon sequestration and climate benefit might even be the bigger part of the equation, or at least half the equation. I'm going to refer to carbon and carbon sequestration, but I want to note that what I'm talking about is not necessarily a carbon market, and it's also not a one-dimensional kind of carbon around that sort of monetization. It's really viewing that soil organic matter and the soil biology as the carbon, and that soil biology as creating all these co-benefits, whether it's resilience to flood or wildfire, tolerance of drought, and all these different things. We're a climate organization, but actually some of the nutrient density benefits, the nutrition benefits, are actually maybe even bigger than climate. An organization called the Bionutrient Food Association has started to release some research. And so these bars are nutrient density analyses comparing like a carrot from one farm versus a carrot from another farm. Spinach from one farm versus spinach from another farm, and you can see like the antioxidants vary 90x, the potassium varies 15x. So healthy soil, absolutely critical, whether or not the science has caught up yet. But back to climate. So our background, I began in the restaurant industry. I'm a chef of a bunch of restaurants. I'm on the board of the James Beard Foundation, and our nonprofit is actually a past winner of the James Beard Award. And we used to work on restaurant carbon neutrality. And then as we started to learn about healthy soil and the climate opportunity from regenerative agriculture, we shifted our focus and formed a collaboration with the state of California. Most recently, we also signed an MOU with the state of Colorado, Department of Ag. And as we were forming the program, California basically wanted to activate the really, really huge climate opportunity of working lands and soils across the state. And, what was amazing was kind of this optimism swirling around regenerative ag coming from a lot of different science organizations. So this is one data point from Project Drawdown, which does some global analyses. And they basically found that food and ag and land are the biggest climate opportunity, and then also probably the least mobilized of the big ones. And then the other thing that was pretty exciting to me about their work is that they kind of do a cost-benefit analysis of all the different solutions. And they found that, among other things, regenerative ag created a huge win-win-win, like many dollars of public savings, farmer prosperity and profit. And so just a lot of co-benefits for each dollar invested in regenerative ag. And Drawdown also kind of at the macro level found that society could solve the entire climate crisis and lower global temperatures if we could just use $29 trillion. And I say just, of course, that's a lot of money, but it also is just 1% of GDP each year. So when California was kind of beginning this, they pointed towards some work in renewable energy. And I think another main takeaway from this conversation should be that the shift in organic matter handling, the diversion, and then the subsequent regenerative agriculture, like that shift to regenerative ag, should be seen at the societal level as on equal footing to the shift in renewable energy. Like it might be as big as the shift in renewable energy. And so we should be using some of the same policy mechanisms to achieve that shift. So one mechanism that's working great in California is called CCA. So that's where you can basically like improve the grid of of energy. You participate in a local renewable energy program. Usually there's some choice architecture that begins with opt-in. Eventually it turns to opt-out, but whether it's the utilities company or another public or another local organization, a couple bucks on an energy bill is going towards the transition to renewable energy. And so similarly, as composting regenerative ag starts to scale, we need that kind of collective action. California now has 25 CCAs after 12 years of work, and the state is at 36% renewable energy. So contrast that with the organic food movement, which is at 1% of acres after 50 years. So it starts to become clear that we're not going to kind of eat our way out of it by just a couple people going to the farmer's market. What needs to happen is really, really large scale economies, circular economies, regenerative economies that facilitate this transition in the field. But fundamentally, there would be no reason why you couldn't have a couple bucks on the trash bill going towards compost application on farms and ranches and vineyards across the state. So fundamentally, we're doing that in two ways. One is kind of on the business front, generating funds for this kind of work from nominal marketing fees like 1% at a restaurant or winery or something. And I can tell you a lot about that, but I think since this is focused on compost, I'm going to stick to that aspect of the program. And so far the program has awarded a lot of those funds, $750,000 to over 40 projects on farms across the state. And really a lot of our work is compost projects. Of course, we market for the businesses. And just to make it like crystal clear, here's a receipt from a Subway sandwiches. We have a franchisee participating with 5 locations in Boulder, Colorado, through some collaborations in Boulder in the state. And you can see Restore Colorado, 11 cents. And so it's just completely seamless, but you start to have a new normal where tens of thousands of dollars per business, maybe millions of dollars per year per county could start to flow towards compost purchasing and compost application on farms and ranches. So how does the money go out? So basically we work with local conservation districts, cooperative extension, and others to get farmers and ranchers to apply for grants. And then they estimate the carbon benefit through this model, the Comet Planner. So this first came out in 2017, and it's a collaboration between Colorado State and the USDA. And it basically allows for a farmer, scientist, politician, business person to estimate the benefit of the next practice. So I took a screenshot here from a compost project we did on a dairy in Sonoma. And you can see you just start putting in a little bit of detail, a little bit of information, the carbon nitrogen ratio, the county, the number of acres. And then the model can basically say, like, hey, if you did this practice on 23 acres, it would take 99.1 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere per year. So of course, it might vary from one year to the next. Maybe one year it's 85, maybe one year it's 120. And so again, this is not rigorous enough to create verified carbon offsets, but it is possible to start comparing one project to another, one farm versus one vineyard in one county versus another, et cetera. We work with local experts, the resource conservation districts, cooperative extension, nonprofits like Point Blue, and kind of organize all the applications to fund the most impactful ones on a per dollar basis first. And I can tell you more about it. There's lots of bonuses we have for circularity and for equity, but I want to move on to the compost piece. And so where there's a really big opportunity in California is through the passage and operationalizing of SB 1383. So fundamentally, this is a regulation geared around diversion. And so you can see, over the course of years, it's planning to scale up organic matter diversion from 10% to 75% statewide. This is a radical change going on, possibly the most important compost policy and maybe even the most important regenerative ag policy going on right now. And CalRecycle, according to some estimates, I read a while ago, said that 90 new facilities would be built in California. This will ultimately result in an increase in compost, of course, and the supply expected is 5 million tons per year. And then as part of the regulations, jurisdictions must purchase some compost. So they'll be purchasing 1.8 million tons per year back of the napkin. They could purchase some combination of like compost mulch or biogas. This number assumes all compost, probably will be the majority, but not 100%. But anyway, that procurement requirement, 1.8 million tons, that's a lot of compost that's going to be purchased. So it is an unfunded mandate, and it's, calculated per capita. And so just to make it simple, like a jurisdiction like San Francisco will purchase 40,000 tons of compost per year if they were meeting their procurement requirement through all compost purchasing. And, that's a lot of compost. And there's not a lot of ag land in San Francisco, hardly any. And so what's interesting and noteworthy about the regulation is that it allows for the purchase and the use of compost from any CalRecycle permitted facility statewide. And the reason that's, I believe, structured that way is because facilities will come online at different rates. Some jurisdictions have a lot of organic matter, but not that much ag land. And some jurisdictions have a lot of ag land and not that much organic matter. And so really the purpose is to create this statewide floor of demand to meet the statewide increase in supply. But what it ultimately means is kind of like a logic puzzle and a nightmare for city planners and waste management folks in any given jurisdiction who are not used to contacting farms and ranches and figuring out projects and overseeing them and organizing them and dealing with, truck companies and freight and logistics and spreading and all these different things. And so since your Foodprint is already working with a lot of farm groups and resource conservation districts and technical experts, we're starting to fill a role as a government contractor, essentially overseeing procurement for carbon farming projects. So we're doing all the record keeping and reporting, coordinating all the projects, and then ultimately trying to use that same kind of optimization work to optimize both the budgets and climate outcomes. And so you can see on this chart, we're basically asking farmers kind of like what compost they would like, when they would like it, and if they're able to cost share on the freight or transportation of the compost, or if they could go pick it up. And so we are kind of gathering this information through farm networks or just word of mouth, jurisdictional word of mouth, and really any sources. And at this point now we have, hundreds of requests basically just waiting for any city or county to buy the compost on behalf of the farmer. This is an example of what that actually means in terms of like the costs and breakdown of a given project. The cost varies, of course, from facility to facility and compost type to compost type. But what we found so far is that really the biggest cost is in the freight. So let's imagine that a farm is applying compost to cropland or, an orchard or something. Let's say they're applying 5 tons of compost per acre. That would be commensurate with some of the practice standards according to CDFA or the NRCS. And so if they were doing that, they might, that 5 tons per acre, maybe, a big 18-wheeler truck would hold 40 tons. So a farm might be able to do, 8 acres using the compost that would fill up one entire 18-wheeler truck. For reference, there's something like 40 million acres of ag in California. So that's a lot of trucks, but it starts to become clear that optimizing like distance and efficiencies on freight are basically like the bigger part of the question here. And so jurisdictions might purchase compost, and then we're essentially trying to find the cost of freight and logistics from any number of sources. It could be farmers themselves chipping in. It could be our grant program from businesses helping to fund some of that. It could be government grants or other grants. And then it could also be jurisdictions agreeing to chip in a little bit on the cost of freight. And so, I've broken down an example here where like maybe the true cost is $75 per ton, but we're helping a jurisdiction, get this done for $40 a ton. And so there's, a lot that could be said about SB 1383, and I think that it's just coming into operation. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity for the folks on this call to be pushing for regional policies that include consideration of carbon sequestration. And like the final outcomes and best quality and best use. And then I want to just kind of like include a teaser here. We're beginning a platform to facilitate transactions and discovery, both by jurisdictions and new compost purchasers. So this is a kind of collage of a bunch of different screenshots. The beta version of the website is at compost.ag, compost.ag. And the long-term vision is that it could sort of be like a hotels.com, or something like that for compost, where you could have a one-stop shop where you're sort of, making all the arrangements for freight and logistics and choosing which facility and kind of geolocating and trying to find and coordinate to optimize the transaction and really make it a lot easier than just calling up each compost company and then trying to figure out freight next, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a long-term goal, but we would love to work with anybody on that. I think I'll stop there, and I can put a few links in the chat to follow up on any of the resources that I mentioned. The one last one is that the USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service just kind of transitioned compost from an interim conservation practice to it's like on the verge of becoming an official conservation practice. And so I think in many ways, sort of like the floodgates are just starting to open for healthy soil and compost projects on farms and ranches and vineyards across the country. Turn it back to Rick. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony. That was very good. Brought us up to speed. I have a few minutes for questions, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and get Gary, get up, tell us where the money's at, and then we'll have a open dialogue with everybody, with, I'm sorry, with Craig and Anthony and Gary as part of it. So Gary Liss, who's an old partner of mine for at least 40, 50 years, and he has basically single-handedly, he has a group of people that's been working with him, put together the Recycling is Infrastructure campaign. And he's going to talk a little about where the money is for these kinds of projects. This year has been a phenomenal year for infrastructure money. And I think it's a window that's open just for a little while. And so we really want to take advantage. Are you ready, Gary?
Yeah. So thanks for the invite to be here, and Anthony, I looking forward to seeing compost.ag on hotels.com. That's a great idea. Sorry for that humor. As Rick mentioned, we're doing the Recycling as Infrastructure 2 campaign since last spring, advocating for including in infrastructure bills pending in Congress last year. Remarkably, Congress listened and included a lot of infrastructure money for reuse, recycling, composting, and I'm going to highlight some of the current requests for applications and notice of availability of funding that is pending that would be of interest. First and foremost for composting are the 2 programs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. One is due September 1st for cooperative agreements from $45,000 to $300,000 for local and municipal governments to plan and implement activities listed on the slide: generating compost, improving quality of soil, increasing rainwater absorption, reducing reliance on fertilizer, encouraging permaculture, a whole variety of eligible activities. On this slide, cooperative agreements is the main page that's hyperlinked. When you get this slide, you can go to that link, and I believe Chris is putting those links into the chat as well. The request for applications, the RFA is out now, again due September 1st. Types of folks that are eligible for that type of funding are local governments and school districts. Tribes are generally the focus for this. The second major USDA funding is for urban agriculture and innovative production. Similar size of the awards, 50 to 300,000. The requests for applications are due almost immediately, August 2nd. So if you've been working on this, getting your ducks in a row to pursue funding, this one is for you. Very similar activities that are eligible in the cooperative grants program, the cooperative agreements. The difference between the cooperative agreements and the grants is cooperative agreements gives more flexibility for the development and implementation of the projects. In terms of what's eligible for urban ag funding, again, school districts and tribes. Interestingly, nonprofits having a 501c3 status other than institutions of higher education. So those are good prospects for businesses working together with these type of eligible entities would be a way to move forward with trying to get federal funding for enhancing your programs. You can find information about that from the main page at Urban Agriculture listed here, and can sign up for email updates contacting urban.agriculture@usda.gov. So that's the first of many federal agencies that are providing input and resources. The US EPA, they're working on developing their request for applications probably this fall. This is the area that has been more publicized in Waste Dive and other waste journals and newsletters. There's $275 million for the facilities at a rate of $55 million a year for 5 years. And eligibility will be for the states, tribes, territories, and political subdivisions. The second EPA infrastructure funding is for outreach and education. That's $15 million a year for 5 years, a total of $75 million. Again, similar eligibility, but also includes nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, and public-private partnerships. I also included the link of the National Recycling Strategy for who you're working with, including in your proposals reference to the National Recycling Strategy, highlighting how your project will contribute to meeting the EPA's goals in their strategy would probably be a good idea. The focus is on empower states, tribes, communities, and other stakeholders to work together. On Brownfield grants is a third major activity of US EPA to assess, safely clean up, and sustainably reuse brownfields. There's lots of opportunities for brownfield help for reuse, recycling, and composting. Eligible entities include local governments, regional governments, redevelopment agencies, states and tribes, nonprofit organizations. Not eligible are businesses and 501c4 nonprofits. This is a great slide from the EPA on the different types of grants under Brownfield. There's 5 major categories. Assessments are looking for determining the Brownfield possibilities of what the environmental impacts are, doing community outreach as part of that. Cleanup grants. This is what most people probably think of for brownfield programs. Multi-purpose to conduct eligible assessment and cleanup at one or more sites. A revolving loan fund to capitalize loans used to clean up. And one of the more interesting ones is job training for environmental training for residents impacted by brownfield sites in their communities. This presentation was from a NRC organized webinar for the Recycling Infrastructure 2 campaign, where EPA Region 4 highlighted that in the bipartisan infrastructure law there was $1.5 billion for brownfield funding, and we also were advised that the brownfield initial applications are a one-page document. I'm not sure for which of the grants that's true, but it was Jay Bassett, who's now an NRC board member, former retired EPA staffer, who highlighted that this is one of the easiest ways to get funding to move forward. There's a variety of solicitations on the street right now. The community's grant solicitation, $5 million over a 5-year period, multi-purpose grants anticipated in September, assessment grants in September, revolving loan fund in September, cleanup grants in September, and state and tribal response programs. So there's all the things we're talking about are coming up in September. It takes a while to get your programs together. In a prior webinar that NRC organized as part of this campaign, we had someone that highlighted that 90% of the work in pursuing grants is doing the upfront planning. pulling together your team, figuring out the details of what you're trying to do, and then moving forward with those. EPA also has pollution prevention funding. This year's cycle we're due in April, but highlighting it because it's an ongoing activity of EPA. There's actually 10 regional centers for pollution prevention that have engineers, scientists, experts that can help eliminate wasteful practices for businesses, particularly focused on hazardous waste, but could be complements to many of the programs that we're looking at. Another key idea that we wanted to share is that all the infrastructure projects could be sources of support for composting programs, as well as the use of reuse systems and recycled content products. All of you could champion that any infrastructure project in your community that you're aware of should use reuse systems, recycled content products, and compost products. And the types of compost products would be for landscaping of buildings and transportation projects, erosion control, stormwater management, stream and lake bank restoration, soil restoration, and infiltration. There's actually a presentation that was given by Frank Franciosa from the Executive Director of the U.S. Composting Council at the National Recycling Congress last year on different uses for compost products that these photos are come from. And it's a really great presentation, and that's now available, will be available after this presentation in the resources that Chris Barnick has pulled together. One of the key messages for you to understand is that most of the federal grants are accessed through grants.gov. To sign up for grants.gov sometimes takes a month or two, we've been told. So it is a process that needs to be followed. There's lots of information there. You can go there right now and search for composting, food waste reduction. This is the front page when you go to grants.gov. At the bottom, the photo on this page, in the top right corner, you see it says enter keyword. That's where you would search for composting, food waste reduction, and different opportunities would come up for that. The notice of funding opportunity, which is the actual details of for the particular grant program, is located under the tab Related Documents. We've also done a variety of webinars on this same topic in March and June. These are links to presentations of those on YouTube. If you want to see more of the details from the actual federal agencies that provided the slides that I was showing here today. I also wanted to highlight environmental justice as a key part of the administration's focus. 40% of the infrastructure funding is supposed to go to disadvantaged communities, which is a new term of art that includes both urban projects, rural projects, tribal projects, and other disadvantaged communities. And there's a facility mapping tool to assist prospective grant applicants to target facilities under this industrial sectors, national emphasis areas related to underserved communities. So you can go to that link and see what the opportunities are. Other resources are Grants Watch from Resource Recycling and grantwatch.com. And I always close my presentations with, if you're not for zero waste, how much waste are you for? And I'll leave it to Rick to cheer us on that message. Back to you, Rick.
Thank you, Gary. That's I think that's helping everybody. We're at the question time, and I noticed a couple of hands were up already. So Chris is keeping record on that. But I think what I saw was Michelle. Are you still got your hand up, Michelle?
I saw one question from Kate Caldwell who said, question for Anthony, how does composting and carbon sequestration offset transport emissions?
So that's an excellent question. Transport of compost is really environmentally intensive. You could imagine 40 tons of compost fitting in one 18-wheeler. And so as you start to think about moving around like thousands of tons of compost, that's a lot of trucking. The flip side, though, is that the carbon sequestration amounts associated with the compost use on farmland are really quite high. So it would be hard to find at this moment like comprehensive studies of that. But individual like one-off studies by organizations like the Carbon Cycle Institute and the Marine Carbon Project have found that applying a 1/4-inch layer of compost to an acre of perennial grassland, grazed grassland, can sequester something like 10 to 30 tons of carbon in the long run. And so if you do some back of the napkin math on that, you basically get that, one 40-ton 18-wheeler full of compost going to a rangeland to apply compost on like 3 acres, let's say, would probably sequester as much carbon as not burning about 5,000 gallons of gas. So even though the gas use is quite large, the carbon sequestration benefit is like many, many times more, maybe 100 times more or whatever. So it would still be worth minimizing the transportation, but you shouldn't like not do a project because of that transportation.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to remove spotlights. And if people would like to raise their hands, we'll answer your questions in order. So let me remove spotlights. Here we are. So any questions, please raise your hand.
Or just get off mute and start talking.
Manuel Medrano has raised his hand.
Yo, thanks for allowing me to get off of Zoom here, but was wondering if any of the speakers have heard of any tax credits offered to farmers for the use of compost, especially if it's derived from food waste sources.
Gary, Craig?
I'll start. The only program I'm aware of is a payment program under Conservation Practice 808, Soil Carbon Amendment by the NRCS, which a previous speaker mentioned is about to go from pilot scale to national scale. As I've read through the documents on that program, a farmer can earn up to $242 per acre for reimbursement for compost purchased from an offsite source. But I'm not aware of any tax credits, but that's a good idea. Here in Virginia, we have a tax program that taxes machinery and tools, and it's imposed by the local jurisdiction. And the Waste Diversion and Recycling Task Force that I sit on has recommended that the General Assembly reimburse farmers and composters for that machinery and tools tax if indeed they use compost from a recycled organics source. So that's a policy issue that maybe other states could look at is, can the state reimburse the local government so the local government sees no loss of revenue in exchange for some sort of tax break for using compost?
And as far as tax credits, the only thing that I can think of is the accelerated depreciation provisions of the 2016 tax laws, which I'm aware of from the paper industry. They have been advocating for a very narrow support. They generally don't like the government providing financial incentives like these, but they had advocated for and got into were part of the 2016 federal tax law that included accelerated depreciation for investment in equipment. So if farmers have to invest in equipment for the use of compost and application of compost or related products, that would be something that they might check into whether that might apply.
Could a local agency go after the infrastructure money to subsidize the local farmers for accepting? I've always heard the application was their biggest cost for application and transportation of this material. You think there's a grant place where we could pull that out?
I don't know for sure. I would refer you to the links that we've provided to pore over the eligibility criteria and see if it's mentioned. EPA actually, for their funding under the infrastructure, is soliciting input right now. That's why there's in the chat a link to a Composting is Infrastructure 2 letter that you'll be going over, asking EPA to make sure there's funding for composting. And in that letter or similar ones, we could be advocating for those types of uses to be eligible activities. Now is the time for that EPA money. The USDA money is very clear and explicit what that's for. So you just need to pore over those existing guidelines. But the EPA money, the deadlines are coming up really soon. I think by the 25th of July for one of them and early August for another. So now's the time to get your comments into EPA, what you'd like to see funded, and tell them that those types of activities should be part of that.
Before we go on to Kelly Kish, I wanted to bring up the question from Agustin Quinones in chat. What are your opinions on urban composting sites? Not as large as industrial composting sites, but less travel emissions.
Craig, you're our site person.
Well, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for community composting operations coupled with or without urban agriculture to help build the infrastructure. There are multiple community composting operations sprouting up all over the place. I think Los Angeles, I think they have like 20 now or something like that. And so there is a need for the state regulations, as usual. State regulations have to catch up with reality. And so there is a need for regulations to be amended that exempt some of these smaller scale facilities from the big facilities regulations, but still requiring some degree of responsible management to make sure there isn't a rodent or vector problem or other issues that occur. Plus, there's a huge need for training. I mean, urban master gardeners are brilliant at being good gardeners, and many of them could benefit from more extensive compost training. So there's a big opportunity here for community scale composting operations to be a big part of the fabric of our infrastructure.
The Institute for Local Self-Reliance had organized a number of community composting conferences nationally that provided education and training on that. And you can Google community composting, and I'm sure you'll get to that type of information, or go to the ilsr.org website and search for community composting. So I totally agree with Craig on that. It's actually a new area of activity in the last 10 years that there's been tremendous growth on. And surprisingly, at the last in-person community composting conference in New York had reported more community composting sites than anywhere in the country, several hundred around the city. We worked in Baltimore on a zero waste plan, a fair development plan for zero waste in Baltimore, where they had a very thriving community composting program, contracting primarily with businesses and institutions like schools for collecting their organics from the commercial, industrial, institutional sector and composting it in small scale community gardens. And in the zero waste plan, we called for the city to focus on the residential side, providing community cleanup, community collections for yard trimmings and food scraps, while the commercial sector would be addressed through an ordinance requiring everyone to do both the service providers to provide recycling and composting services, and then the community composters would fit in that commercial, industrial, institutional realm.
Let's go on to Kelly Kish, if you would like to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for hosting this. Always great to hear about grant opportunities I didn't know exist, and I'm very sad that the deadlines for some of them are so soon. I am on the board of the Minnesota Composting Council, a U.S. Composting Council state chapter, and we will be submitting comments to the U.S. EPA grants. But looking at the letter that was linked in the chat, there's one thing that we will be commenting on that I think may be a good addition. So while there are no issues with compost being used in the state of California, here in Minnesota, we are working really hard with our Department of Transportation and other agencies to increase the actual use of compost. So I feel, or I should say, one of the items we'll be commenting is that market development activities we feel should be eligible for the infrastructure grant funding. Just because, if the product is not going to be used, diverting all of it in the world isn't going to keep up without the closed system on that end. So I think that's a possible item to add to the letter. And then also that we feel the infrastructure grant should also be eligible for nonprofits. We have more of the expertise in our area at the nonprofit level to be doing this work. But we are not an eligible applicant at the current time. So that's another comment we'll be making to them and urge you to consider including as well.
Great suggestions. If you have anything in writing that you could share with Rick and Chris to consider modifying that letter or adding to an additional letter, that would be great. So thank you for that. On the market development, probably one of the best things done in California on market development was in the early 90s. The state invested in real research and development, testing for particular crops, the increasing growth associated with the use of compost. And that data really helped penetrate the marketplace of agriculture, which is huge in California, that hadn't really understood the benefits. So definitely market development. NRC is totally focused on that. The Recycling Infrastructure Campaign developed America Recycling Infrastructure Plan that include market development as a key part of that. So you're right on point. Great comments. Please get those in. Share it with us. Let's work as a team to get them to see this. And at EPA, they really are open to this comment. They are doing a lot of work and doing a lot of webinars to get input before they do their request for applications. It's a very open, transparent process, and now's the time to comment.
And I will definitely share that with you. Our board chair, Miss Ginny Black, is working on the letter right now. So we will pass that on to you.
Great.
Before we go on to Anthony.
Say hi to Ginny for me.
I would like to bring up some observations that have since popped up in the chat from Dan Knapp. He says, if you sell finished compost or mulch at retail, I would imagine that in sales tax states, a lot of money would come in from these sales. My company is in the reuse business, and we collect around $29,000 per month in sales tax that is used to finance government operations. He also said, I also think it might be good to try to keep land costs for community composting low by reusing the surface of old landfills for that purpose. What is the reality of this? Can it be done? The nice thing about old landfills is that haulers already know how to go there and get rid of stuff. It's convenient. So yes, those are two observations. There are more, but let's roll with Anthony.
Before we go with Anthony, can I just interject on the old landfills? Brownfields money can be used for those. So that was a huge revelation we heard on the June webinar of this campaign. Old landfills are a great place for siting of compost facilities, and they are brownfields. Sorry, Anthony, back to you.
Oh, no, you're good. I was only just going to say +1 to Kelly. Please share the letter. We would love to co-sign and work on that. You say that there's a market for compost in California, and that's true based on the existing amount of diversion. But when diversion scales up to 90%, then there's going to need to be a huge market developed also. And it's going to be critical to have incentives for best use and for agricultural suitability. So we would love to sign on that letter and get others.
Well, between the vineyards, the cannabis growers, I think there's going to be a lot of demand for compost and mulch. But I wanted to say on the brownfield and the closed landfill issue, as being in the field, all these old landfills have to be remediated under RCRA and closed properly. And then they're still on the list as part of a solid waste. It's like an agricultural district. It's almost a designated solid waste area. So I would take a good look at some of those old, and what they were is the old burning dumps that were closed down in 1970, 1975 after the Clean Air Act. They're probably not lined. They're probably being monitored for methane emissions, and they would make great places to put local composting facility. And my last point is I've been told by some that urban areas will never have a windrow composting program allowed. And I live in San Diego, and right in the middle of the city is the greenery where they process up to 2,000 tons a day. Mostly it's been windrow composting. Today they're moving towards the air injections, but it can happen, and it's happened in Monterey and their area too. So take a look at that. It's going to be tough to take new land, but stuff that's already contaminated that you can upgrade and use federal money to improve is something to look at. Okay, I'm sorry. What do we have? Who else? Did Michelle ever get a chance to ask her question? I see her.
That was Michelle Minstrel, not the other Michelle that's responded in chat.
Oh, right. Okay. Minstrel had her hand up. Right. All right. Well, okay. Manuel
had his hand up first, and then I have a question too. But Manuel, I believe, had his hand up first.
Sure.
Oh, just a fundamental question for everybody in the group here. And I'm asking this question with my local jurisdiction, local city representation here. So in California, as it was explained earlier, we have a procurement requirement, and so what does that do to the health of a market in our state if a lot of us are in our agreements to provide this program for our residents are now requiring our waste haulers to provide this compost at no cost to us? So I'm concerned that this is going to not help the markets develop as healthy as they could. I mean, I know we're just a subset of the overall state market in California, but it's still a lot of us are giving it away. Rick just mentioned the facility here in San Diego, which basically gives it away for free. And the same thing we're doing in our city here in Chula Vista. So what is the group thought of this, of offering this material at no cost, sometimes for city projects and to residents, and what does that do to our markets?
Anthony, that's you.
I'm not familiar with regulations that require giving it away. I know jurisdictions are required to purchase compost as part of SB 1383. So Manuel, is that something that you...
Well, yeah, maybe I didn't explain it correctly. So a lot of us jurisdictions are requiring our waste hauler to provide this material at no cost for either city operations like parks and green spaces. And a lot of it is also giving it away to our residents and whomever wants it. So again, I'm thinking we're devaluating the material by giving it away. So what does that do to a market?
Yeah,
So can you just clarify, are you speaking on behalf, you're the jurisdiction and you're requiring the producers to give it away?
We're requiring our waste hauler to make it available at no cost to us for any city project.
I can give an example. In San Jose, when I was solid waste manager there, we had that very concern, and we required the hauler to provide 10% to the city at no cost because we didn't want to undercut the market value of the material, and we didn't want to give that away for free. So that was to be used in city parks, landscaping of buildings and roadways and the such. So in San Jose, that was the determination that I can say. I'm not as familiar with the overall marketplace these days, but that's a good example of. We had John Madole from Minnesota develop a composting plan for San Jose back in the 1980s when we developed that approach, and he underscored that concern, and that's how we addressed it.
Yeah, the main problem with giving compost away is you're signaling to the market that it has no value.
Right.
And therein lies the problem. You have to at least charge for the nitrogen, phosphate, and potash value of the compost. So if your compost averages roughly 1.7% N, 0.9% P, 0. As phosphate, 0.7% K as potash, you're looking at a floor value of about $6 or $7 a cubic yard. And that should be your floor price for everybody.
And then when you look at value-added products, that's where the real value comes, when you're mixing and matching to meet different market specifications for different uses of different compost and mulch and soil conditioners. American Soil Products in Berkeley made a thriving business out of mixing and matching. Many composters around the country have done that. If you're just trying to get rid of this stuff, that's not helping the marketplace. It's really figuring out what the market needs, what are the market demands, the specifications, meeting those with the introduction of a mix of different types of ingredients.
Unfortunately, a lot of local jurisdictions here in California, that's what they're doing to meet that requirement. And that's what's affecting, it could potentially affect the markets.
Yeah, I'm not saying California is doing everything right.
Well, back when we started it back here in San Diego, we at the landfills in the mid-90s, we were pulling out the organics and trombling them. And in our case, the contractor of the landfill was in charge, and the pile got so high, we went, as the county went to him, say, you've got to sell this stuff. And he said, nah, we're waiting for market. I said, you wait a little longer, I'm going to have it's going to be a big bonfire it's going to catch on fire. And what we did is we hauled it to the wild animal park and the zoo. And I agree that the local composters said that we should not give this stuff away. It's an old tactic. I don't think in the new millennium many people are going to do that anymore. What I heard, the price of finished compost was in Montana was like $200 a ton. So I think we got to get rid of the landfill as the dumping for this product.
Ruth may have some insights. She's got her hand up.
Yep.
Ruth?
Hey, I just wanted to respond to Manuel and say, obviously the product has value because your haulers are providing it to you for free, but they are paying for that.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a price there. You're just paying for that in your collection system. So everybody in the city is actually paying for the delivery of that product. So it's free, quote unquote, to the city. The ratepayers are paying for it, and then you're giving it away free as an amenity to the ratepayers. But I think everybody needs to recognize that this is not a free product. You are paying through your rate for that, right, Manuel?
That's correct. And
right?
I would say the majority of jurisdictions, that's the way, I guess that's a price structure, if you could think of it.
So I think that I think that's just, hey, we're buying it, we're paying for it. And I think the reason that California law required that is because there was this perception that there was not a marketplace for these products in Southern California in particular. And I think that will evolve over time. Right now they made a requirement on jurisdictions to purchase, and jurisdictions made their haulers purchase. So, I mean, like passing the buck, right? But I think eventually that might settle out and say, hey, look, there is a diverse, rich market for compost products, quality compost products across the state. And so maybe that will ease over time. But I think, giving away compost for free to residents, okay. But everybody needs to recognize that they're paying for that through their rates.
And the giveaway for residents is, I mean, it's a minute amount. I'm thinking of also of somewhat quote unquote creative ways that some jurisdictions are making sure they're procuring this material. I understand there's JPAs and other jurisdictions in the Bay Area that are working with local farmers to provide it for use, and there is at a small cost, or perhaps even for free, as long as they have what the regulation requires, a written agreement with an end user. So again, in a way, not really helping the market develop. But I understand your point, Ruth. It makes a lot of sense. Eventually, we'll get to that point. I'm just worried that all these programs throughout the state might not let the market develop as healthy as it could.
And there's
we're in a transitional period, though, because there was a perception that there was no market. So the state required the jurisdictions to provide the market, and hopefully that will evolve.
And there's a good discussion in the chat, particularly Dan Knapp highlighting about the importance of product differentiation, which is what I was talking about in terms of meeting the market specifications for different types of products. And Michelle Minstrel highlighting that compost should qualify as recycled content for use on LEED projects. So there's a whole host of market development tools like Kelly was talking about for Minnesota. That's what we need to be focusing a lot of energy on, and hopefully we'll advocate for that in our collective letters to the EPA, that they invest in those efforts as well.
Have we answered Emily Cregan's question?
Emily?
Yeah, I put my hand down. Thank you. Dan did answer it. Thanks in the chat here.
Thanks, Emily.
I think Claire had a question a while back about kind of compost machinery. I'm not qualified to answer that. You see, the question was, speaking of urban composting, what are your thoughts of utilizing compost machinery that breaks down food scraps in a closed system, machinery like eco-rich commercial composter that can process 4,000 pounds per day?
You want to try that one, Craig?
With regard to that particular model, and I'm not familiar with that one, there are a number of models in the marketplace that claim to do it quickly. I'm a little bit of an old-fashioned composter. I like to believe Mother Nature takes her time. I mean, we can speed it up a little bit, but only to a point. And a lot of these, yeah, you can have composted 2 or 3 day systems are, I suspect, not entirely legit.
You know, in England, because of the mad cow disease, when we were working there in East Anglia, the rule was any organic composting that was going to be fed to the land was going to have to be in a vessel, because they didn't think the windrow was totally getting all of the material digested at the same time. How do you respond to that, Craig?
Well, that is an issue with windrow composting, is that it's hard to get temperatures above 55 C throughout the windrow for the duration of that 15-day passage and kill period. But it's not impossible. It just requires the right recipe, the right mix, and it benefits largely from a cover, either a fabric cover on the windrow or a compost or wood chip cover that insulates that windrow and cuts down on that heat loss.
Then you have to, if you do that, you have to inject air in there, right?
No, No, if you use unscreened compost as your bio layer, to use the term of art that we use, then you should get enough passive air diffusion to replace the air and the heat that's lost as the heated air rises out of the center of the windrow.
I like to respond to the eco-rich commercial composter also. I just looked that up online. Particularly the commercial applications are typical of on-site composters, and there's literally dozens of manufacturers that have different bells and whistles to provide there. But it's one of the sweet spots, in my opinion, that on-site composting saves a lot of money, and that 80 to 90% of the cost of any solid waste or recycling system is in the hauling. So if you're not hauling it off-site, if you're using it, if you're manufacturing and using it on-site, you're saving a whole lot of money, and the money that you've saved can be invested in that equipment to buy it and pay it off over an amortization period. So those on-site composters have been particularly used by a lot of university and institutional settings, corporate industrial park settings, where there's a little bit more space and room than a downtown urban setting. But there's lots of examples of those around the country, and those have evolved through the years, again with different bells and whistles and improvements that each manufacturer touts. But there's definitely a huge opportunity for addressing a particular generator's needs.
When Ruth and I were in India, we went to Kerala. In Kerala, you're responsible for your own organics, and you can take it to areas behind bus stops where they'll have composting facilities going on. But the government will give homeowners their own composter, and they'll give restaurants and hotels these small digesters that are going to create some gas that they can use. We need to take a look at what's happening there and see if that applies to any of our situations here in the USA.
There was another comment from Kate Caldwell in the chat about the composting warehouse home composters, and there's again lots of those out there. Anything on site saves those generators a lot of money. Particularly if the rates are structured appropriately, where you pay more with pay-as-you-throw type waste rates, which are in place in over 9,000 communities around the country.
Claire says that she's specifically interested in using an on-site system for her city's downtown restaurant organic waste, about 30 restaurants.
Yeah, that would be a great application. That or a community composter collecting that. A number of cities have bicycle composters where they go around by bicycle as one of the easiest ways to maneuver. But so community composting or an on-site size composter for a collected route definitely would pencil.
Well, I heard this idea in Austin, and actually, Buddy Boyd did this in Gibson in Vancouver. Was that got a little small digester, and then allowed people to bring in buckets of organics, and they'd have to pay them for it to take it. He'd run it through the digester, and then at the end of the system, he'd give them back the finished material. I like that idea. I just don't know if anybody's done that successfully.
Well, Atlanta did the zero waste zone, which the downtown businesses found that they were losing conventions to other states that were touting their green credentials. And to bolster their green credentials, they set up a zero waste zone to tout in their proposals to land conferences and conventions. And they had a composting operation for the Olympics in Atlanta. They got that working to provide composting services to the downtown restaurants, hotels, convention center, and then they were able to achieve zero waste standards. And the National Restaurant Association actually bought the rights for that idea of implementing zero waste zones around the country, and have the ability to work with downtown business districts to help set that up. I know San Francisco subsequently, even though the city-wide zero waste goal was adopted early in the 2000 period, they just in the last 5 years set up a zero waste zone at Pier 39, just to give added impetus and added exposure and visibility to people that they're entering this zero waste zone and making a big deal of it.
So Augustin Quinonez had a question. It's very site specific though. Hey there, I found a 12,000 square foot lot in Inglewood, California to possibly compost at. Is there anyone here I can connect with? I'm seeking some mentorship to get it up and running. Any advice / tips?
I was born and raised in Inglewood, so I'm curious. I'm curious, what park are you going to take out of commission to do composting? I mean,
there's a lot. It's a square foot lot.
Are you actually born and raised in Inglewood?
I was born in East LA, but I was raised from 5 years old, Daniel Freeman, to Morningside High School. I mean, I played in the Inglewood Boys Band, in fact. Yes. So where is this lot? I'm curious. And maybe
I actually got to know a developer, and we've been talking, and he can't build on the plot of land because it's on a fault line, earthquake fault line, and he's looking to just donate the space to the community. So it's right on La Brea and what's the other cross street? It's near La Brea and Centinela. It's a 12,000 square foot lot, and he's open to the idea.
Okay.
Do community composting there.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. That's the idea.
He can't have Centinela Park. I just can't do it. But maybe Inglewood would be a challenge. Maybe an in vessel could probably work. All right. Well, it's 3:30. Do we have more questions on the great experts and lots of good information? I even have to say I learned a bunch. I really did. I think I know everything. I mean, it turns out I don't. So that's all. That's all good.
Sign up for grants.gov. Sign up for grants.gov. That's the first step, and it takes time to get through it.
All right. Okay. Well, anything else from anybody for the good of the game? Okay, then I think I will officially adjourn the meeting. Thank you, you experts. You really helped us a lot, and I hope that we'll move this. What I'd like is anybody who starts this program and gets something going to let us know so that we can showcase you on the COOLNow website and let everybody know that it's something that everybody can do and what we want them to do. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.